Hello, my name is Tonye Barango, and I am the self-care maven here at Freedom at the Crossroads. Welcome to my channel. Here we talk all things decolonized self-care, empowerment, and lifestyle strategies for Black women over 40. Now, today's topic is self-care culture vultures and why Black women need to be concerned about this. Now, I had previously scheduled this for a different time, but due to my own self-care needs and some other thoughts and discussions I was having off platform, today is the day we're going to address this. Now, many of you know I'm always on topic when it comes to self care, particularly decolonized self care and what that looks like for Black women. And when I say self care culture vultures, that should be a hint about what we're going to be addressing and the fact that I'm going to go a bit deeper into that. Now, self care didn't start with influencers, luxury candles, or curated routines. For us as Black women, and for a number of non white or non Caucasian, non European cultures, self care is an ancestral practice, a survival strategy that's a community practice, a sacred ritual. And for a number of weeks now, I've been getting more and more. Excuse me, I need to take a little quick sip of my tea. And oddly enough, sidebar here. I'm drinking English breakfast tea, and yes, the irony does not elude me. Now, when it comes to, again, when we start talking about self-care and self-care cultural vultures and what that looks like, I'm talking about things like erasing the ancestral healing of Black wellness traditions. And I'm just going to, tap into the fact that our grandmothers, ancestors, they practiced self care long before it became a trend. And I say that to say things like herbalism, our spiritual baths, midwifery, community healing circles, those are all rooted in cultural knowledge that was passed down. Now, today, these past practices, or rather more recently, as self care has become a thing now, it's really become commodified. And they're either, the actual originators of these practices, namely Black and Indigenous groups, uh, we are dismissed and our practices co opted without any kind of acknowledgement. And these are things, if we're going to start practicing decolonized self care, particularly as Black women, we need to begin to reintegrate our ancestral practices as well as our ancestral knowledge base in order for self care as it should be, should look as in order for it, excuse me, in order for it to look like, feel like, and do the internal work that it was always designed to be. Now, I'm also talking about, too, when it comes to culture vulturing, the erasure in more detail of ancestral healing and Black wellness traditions. Okay, this isn't new to us. From the time we were on the continent till the time we were brought here through violence and all kinds of horrific atrocities to the diaspora, self care has not been a new thing. These are practices that our ancestors did in their kitchens, their gardens, their religious gatherings, and community circles. Yet, in mainstream media, the mainstream version of self care, It often ignores and devalues these practices. Instead of honoring Black traditions, it uplifts whitewashed versions. Keyword white. Okay? Essential oils, without the root, yoga without the resistance, mindfulness stripped of all its cultural power. And if you have been following me and followed any of my previous videos, you know how important context and cultural um, integrity, the how important these things are when it comes to any practice of self-care, particularly as Black people. For us, I know a lot of people, even on various platforms I've spoken on and connected with other people on in self-care. Um, I've had pushback with folks saying, well, you guys make everything about race. Well, Indigenous and Black folk never, there was no concept of race before colonization, before empire building, before that brutality was spread by a certain group across the globe. And so, by definition, Black bodies, Black ways of being, particularly here in the diaspora, has always been political. Our bodies, our lives have always been policed, have always been political. You can change the robes, you can change the terms, but the fact of the matter is racism and anti-Blackness are global things. And we as Black people have been navigating this. Black people and Black and Indigenous people have been existing under these institutions, not by choice, but by design of colonizers and colonizing influences. Okay? And so, what you need to know here is that our traditions, our healing, all of that, we now, thank goodness, due to the hard work of a number of researchers who are truly doing the hard work and the heavy lifting when it comes to self-care, when it comes to its connection to um, health outcomes in the health and wellness arena. We have the data to back it up. And it's an unfortunate fact that practices that have been proven historically and culturally to be of relevance and to be valid, it's unfortunate that we actually need an external validation, because you know how our history is here too in the in the diaspora and in the US, the social, because of the social constructs of this country. We already know, right? we got to do we got to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times better than our non-Black counterparts in order to be taken seriously, in order to be given the same or half the same. So we know how that works. And so I'm just consulting some notes here, making sure I don't miss any of my points here, because they're very important. um, I go on to, I'm looking at as well how in this whole culture vulturing scenario, when it comes to the vulturing of self-care in our practices, we need to also revisit how our self-care became commodified and whitewashed in the process. Now, back in the day, during civil rights, around that time, because I'm not going to revisit the details and wherewithals when it comes to the civil rights movement and its connection to self-care. Self-care was once a radical act of political resistance, especially for Black women under constant systemic oppression and stress. And one of my favorite all-time authors, one of my all-time feminists, Black feminists, and freedom fighters, especially when it comes to Black bodies and when it comes to self-care, Audre Lorde, when she said, self-care is an act of political warfare. And I'll never forget how, when I was having this conversation with a non-Black colleague, a European American Caucasian colleague, um, she completely sidestepped the whole issue of um self care for us being an actual act of resistance and arguably warfare. And she said, "Oh, self care is not about war. It's about peace." And I was like, I had to stop her. I said, "Girl, no, you are not going to whitewash our bodies, our resistance, because historically, remember, in previous videos, I've also spoken of this as well. There were actual laws put in place where Black women could not even be in their own homes tending to their own kids and their own families. There was that time. So when you look at things like labor laws, the what is it, the 5-day work week, and so on and so forth, all of this ties into racism, the foundations of chattel slavery and systemic exploitation and brutality against on Black bodies. So all of this is rooted when you don't know the source, when you don't know the root. Things like erasure happens. And erasure of Black people, the struggle and the context and the culture of Black people, when you start systematically erasing that, that is violence. And when I had that conversation with her, it made her very uncomfortable. And I said, yeah, it's the discomfort that you're feeling, that is also called self awareness. You will not erase our culture, our struggle, in our experience by whitewashing this whole thing called self-care. Self-care is very little about self-care is soft and luxury. Self-care is about replenishment, nourishment, healing. And in a lot of instances, in order for healing to come about, there's going to be some discomfort. For instance, when you exercise, when you begin the process of exercising, it's not typically comfortable. It's not soft. It's not neat. You sweat. Your heart rate gets up. You feel the pull, the ebb and pull, and you feel the stress on your ligaments, on your muscles. That's exercise. That's a component of self care. So, why in the world does it make sense for something as fundamental or necessary as self care? Why should that be any different? But it's when you're trying to exercise control and commodify things that are should be naturally embedded and implemented as a community, as self, and all of that within a culture, within experience, and within knowledge, ancient knowledge, that's when things get pulled into disarray. And that's when things are no longer relevant and they fall flat and they have no real impact. Again, I've had clients, I've had colleagues have issues with self care. And speaking of accessing, that word accessing, how do you enter in to self care when you have no point of relation? That's by design. When you whitewash a culture's tradition, their ways of knowing, their knowledge base, and all of that, there's no point of entrance. It's all about making those things inaccessible. In a previous video, I also talked about how mainstream self-care, it wasn't built for us. And it is extremely harmful, dangerous, and it is a form of violence. I've spoken about how you cannot expect to enter into a space that has the trappings of healing, and you're the only one in that space that looks like you. Where is the safety? Where is the sense of rest? You can't rest. You can't exhale. You can't truly be vulnerable in a space where you are not safe. And however you gaslight yourself, or whatever social conditionings have been in place, because remember now, part of our survival strategy was coddling Caucasian Americans, making white folk feel comfortable so that we could mitigate the violence done against us. Now, this is historical, and guess what? This is also not passed down in terms of how we still engage now. And this is why I always speak as well of how important it is to do the internal work when it comes to decolonize self-care. It's going to make you do the work. You're going to unpack whatever anti-blackness you're carrying, whatever internal racism, because guess what? All those things have to be unpacked and removed in order for you to enter in to decolonize self-care that will heal, uplift, and reintegrate you with the cultural traditions and practices associated with decolonized self-care, which is essentially our own self-care practices and knowledge bases that are culturally relevant and tied to us. And this is generational as well as historical knowledge that we carry within us as a people. Now, I'm just going to highlight one of the what I want you to take away from this point here when it talked about self-care culture vultures and stolen rituals and silent theft. And this typically, we see this in a lot of platforms. For those of you who watch Sinners and watch my little tie in on a previous video to Sinners when it comes to culture vulture, it's not always overt. In a lot of instances, this is where the whole whitewashing thing comes. People conveniently strip out the fact that these were practices that were indigenous and then have been repackaged and commodified and sold by white women, thin white women, as the standard for self-care and soft luxury living, etc., etc., etc. And if you watch that video and even some other videos and all of the discussions around Sinners and why it resonated so heavily with Black people, not just here in the diaspora, but globally, because we recognize the extraction and exploitation of not just our labor, our ideas, our practices, but also our pain and suffering. All of that has been commodified. And when you commodify things, that is an indicator. If you're looking for a red flag, that is an indicator of something being colonized. And you more than likely need to step away and remove yourself from that, because there's nothing but harm associated with that. There are a lot of things that are uh, marketed to us and sold to us that are extremely unhealthy and dangerous. Everything from music, uh, ways of eating foods that I'm not even going to go into. I have a separate rant when it comes to the standard American diet and the food pyramid and all of that drama and controversies surrounding that when it comes to food, because not only do you need to decolonize your self-care, you need to decolonize your ways of eating and your foods. Case in point, I'm going to harken back to my African side of my family when it comes to food and traditional ways of eating, in terms as well as decolonizing that. I remember growing up, there were certain food staples that we as children were given to eat prior to starting our days at school, as well as the time we ate. All of that has been touched by colonization and the brutality associated with that. There were traditional foods in certain specific food groups, if you will, that we used to eat as children for fuel. I'll never forget, my aunts on my father's side, and just families in general, as we as children were socialized to consume certain foods prior to the day, because it was going to help keep you, your mind focused. It was going to give you energy to get through the school day, and so on and so forth. Now, the standard American diet, also known as the colonial diet, excuse me. We are, as many healthcare professionals are saying, are exporting that unhealthy, sad diet to other parts of the world, also known as the, ironically, standard American diet, which is very sad. That just says it all. So, not to get long winded about that, when this is another area of that has been impacted, diet and weight loss has been commodified in mainstream media and whitewashed. When you whitewash people's food practices, food ways, diet, when you commodify that, when you colonize that, the people suffer of those groups, of those non-white groups suffer. Now, that's not to say that various cultures, indigenous cultures, and POC cultures don't have unhealthy elements to their diet, but specific to and characteristic of most non-white groups, Black and African and indigenous groups, is this whole arc umbrella of balance and alignment. And that is core to our cultures, to our traditions, to all of our different modalities that we practice. And so when you extract that from those practices, everything falls out of alignment and out of balance. Hence, you have diabetes, um, extreme weight, and unhealthy diets being exported to other parts of the world. Commodified. So that's just another rant I wanted to touch on. What you need to start to be noting here is that self-care wasn't meant to be bought. It was meant to be embodied. True healing is inclusive, it is political, it is accessible. When you start, as a Black woman, when you start encountering barriers, I want you to start going forward. We are almost at the 6 month uh, point of the year in 2025. With everything that's going on, if you want to self-care effectively as a Black woman, you're going to need to practice decolonized self-care. One. Two, you need to start looking for those flags. Just like we've talked about red flags in dating, you need to start looking for red flags in all these so-called wellness practices. And one of them will be accessibility. If you're running into problematic barriers to accessing wellness, i.e., you've got to pay some ridiculous amount of money to get to a particular gym. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been doing my own informal survey of Pilates classes, Pilates studios, yoga gyms. I've been doing all of that. And one thing they have in common, the more luxury, the more amenities, etc., all the, proverbial trappings that you see being popularized and, exposed on social media, Instagram, TikTok, all of that, ridiculously expensive. And that there is a huge barrier to entry for a number of everyday people, for a number of everyday Black women. When you have the added context and intersectionality of discrimination, racism, institutionalized discrimination, white supremacy, all of that plays in. When you look at the institutions that have created that form of inaccessibility, then you understand that that's a problem. I've had a few potential clients speak to the fact that it's just too expensive and they can't do it. And I say, what makes it expensive? They said, well, for one thing, membership is like, for everything I would like to do, I would like to start, putting in place I'm interested in doing. And, my doctor even said, oh, I need to take up XYZ exercises. They cost over $100. Who in this economy, working an average 9 to 5, has got an extra 250 to spend for the gym? I'm, you know, asking for a friend. Who's got that? Especially if you're a Black woman who has to have multiple jobs to make ends meet in order to get paid what your non-Black colleague is getting paid, even though you more than likely are more qualified for the same job and have more um, education, but yet and still you're getting paid a fraction of what she's getting paid. So where is one, the access in terms of money? Two, the time availability. Time is also a resource. And when your time is predicated on, your survival, and this is why I said so important as Black women, we need to practice decolonized self-care so that you can exit and remove yourself from this whole, not just hustle culture, which is steeped in white supremacy, but also remove yourself from that kind of harm, because it is an effect of weathering. The research was done by that. I can't remember the Black researchers that actually did this groundbreaking study on weathering. These are long-term impacts of dealing with institutionalized racism and discrimination, misogyny, dealing with institutionalized oppression in general context. And when you're constantly in that mode, let's remember, we too are part of the animal kingdom. And so we too go into survival mode, we go into flight or fight. The difference is, unfortunately, where other animals in the animal kingdom are able to, once that immediate danger is gone, they are able to go back into balance and equilibrium. They exit that space of being in survival mode. However, we as Black people, because of our history in the diaspora and globally, what are the kind of violence, structural and institutionalized violence we've been living under globally, and particularly in this society here in the diaspora, we are in a constant state of that. And so the long-term effects of that are higher incidences of healthcare, chronic illness. You have healthcare disparities even in the healthcare system, regardless of what social economic class you're in. So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with those stressors on every level, every day. And so instead of self caring, which is holistic, which is culturally relevant, which is nurturing, which is healing, you're actually in a low vibrational state of survival. And that does nothing but trigger inflammation long term. And when you're in an inflammatory state long term, your body is in an inflammatory line long term. It was never designed to be in that state long term continuously. Things break down quicker, you get sick more, you develop chronic illnesses, your mental health is impacted. And so when you don't practice decolonized self-care, that's basically the state you're in. And you get to a point that you're conditioned and you so conditioned in this toxic society that you normalize that as a survival strategy. And part of decolonized self-care is bringing you to one awareness of that, because you can't start any healing modality practice without self awareness. You're just operating on automatic. You're just a hamster on that wheel, going nowhere. You're not self aware. You're not plugged in. You're not doing any of the work. You're just existing. This is 2025, ladies, and I need us to come out of that. And in order for us to come out of that, we've got to do decolonized self care, which is intrinsically healing, it is nurturing, it is safety, it is growth, it is the work. And this is something that a legacy of our people from the continent, in the diaspora, a whole knowledge base of wellness, that because of where we are and what we exist under, a number of us, a large percentage of us, have lost that. And we're in a time now where we're in the process of reclaiming all of these traditions. The more knowledge we get, the more sharing we do. We're in that process now. Now, if you've noticed as well, I also speak to the fact that when I go live on or do these videos on especially on these decolonized self-care issues and modalities, when it comes to self-care as a Black woman, and teaching and sharing knowledge on self-care for Black women, decolonized self-care for Black women, I speak to the fact that you will hear me speak on these practices when I talk about the ancient wisdom of our grandmothers, our mothers, of our ancestors, and traditional practices. You will note that I never go into a lot of detail on these open platforms. Why? Because one of the critical points regarding decolonized self-care is that it should be gatekept. That's the problem now, is why we have one of the reasons now why we have one of the main reasons right now why we have culture vultures in the self-care space is because we were too welcoming. And unfortunately, that is the double-edged sword of being who we are as a people. We're very nurturing, we're very communal based, and that's both a strength and a weakness in the wrong settings. When you're out of alignment, when you're out of balance, you start breaking down your own boundaries, i.e., your gates. There are certain practices and traditional modalities that should be gate kept, and I will stand on that with my 10 toes. Just going to drink a little more tea. I will stand on that. There are certain deep levels of self-care that merge in Black spirituality, Black herbalism, that must be gate kept in order to protect them from self-care culture vultures. It is what it is. Until you have established those boundaries and until we as a people reclaim that, part of that reclamation process anyway is gatekeeping, reclaiming what was stolen, and theft. In order to mitigate that, in order to stop that, this is something that most cultures everywhere, back in the day, centuries, millennia, have always understood that there are certain practices and modalities that must be gate kept in order to preserve their integrity and relevance. Things like hoodoo, certain midwifery practices. I alluded to that in one of my earlier videos when I was talking about one of the sacred self-care practices around women who are about to give birth, who are at the end stage of pregnancy in Nigeria, in my part of Nigeria, and I know that other African countries as well, and in groups have similar practices around self-care that is specific to pregnant women. And I alluded to that, but I purposely didn't go into that detail as much as I know and as little as I know about that, because I am not a midwife. And so I was only, as a child and as a teenager, I was only given to a certain access, a certain level of access to that. But even that was training and knowledge that was delivered and, that was age appropriate. But even I, at that time, understood that that was something that was sacred, and it was something that needed to be gate kept. That wasn't something you shared with men in the community, and it wasn't something you shared with outsiders, i.e., colonizers. You did not share that there either. And there's a reason for that. In order to protect and respect and honor these practices, these words, these terms that I'm delivering and sharing with you are aspects of decolonized self-care that have been stripped away in those culture vulture version of that, where things have been repackaged and commodified, and some, influencer, typically non-black, has been put on as the face of, oh, this is self-care. No, it ain't. You can't access it. It wasn't built for you. And it's toxic and dangerous anyway. You don't want that. Just like in the movie Sinners, there's a clear distinction between the sacred and the profane. And it's time that we as Black women begin to reclaim and embrace that. So that's just a few of the points I wanted to touch on. And just more on a little bit more, a few examples on culture vulturing in the self-care space and what that looks like um, in the wellness industry, where you see things like, what is it? Yoga, back to yoga. Yeah, yoga's gonna get these, it's gonna get these hands. Unfortunately, it's just gonna catch strays, because this is one of the most well-known healing practices that has been self-care vulturized by, the non-originators, right? And so that we healing baths. I'm not going to go into details about that. A hoodoo, smudging. I know there were a couple of years ago when I was doing research on sage and Palo Santo, and the outcry from the indigenous community about how, the commercialization of those practices the whitewashing of those practices, how they were impacting the ecology, because that was being, we had all these self-care culture vultures so appropriating and commercializing these things out of context, that it was impacting the environment. Too much of a certain type of sage was being extracted from the environment. Same thing with Palo Santo, all of that. Too much of that was being taken out of that, as well as a healing herb. I believe it's is it ghost? I forgot what it's called. It's a type of ancient healing mushroom that the indigenous groups here in North America from a particular region have been using, and you cannot cultivate it. It just naturally sprouts and grows in this particular region. And because it was being exploited by colonizers, it was becoming endangered. Now, as of my recent research, I'm not sure if that's still the case, but I'm going to lean in that direction. That's just one of the impacts of commercializing, whitewashing sacred traditional self care practices and modalities. It's taken out of alignment, is decontextualized, is stripped and brutalized. Notice the connection between the brutalization and marginalization of the originators, as well as their cultural practices and modalities. This is what I need us to start understanding as Black people and as Black women, especially when it comes to healthcare, self care, because self care, decolonized self care, is the gold standard for us, and it is the only one that effectively addresses our lived experiences. I need us to start tapping in, and that's why I constantly hark on this, and that's why I built this platform and have been building this platform for that. Having said that, I would encourage you, if you're hearing something today from me that really resonates with you as a Black woman, as a Black person, please hit the follow button and notifications for when I go live again. Sometimes I go live twice a week, usually somewhere during the regular work week, and then on the weekends, typically 12 noon Central Standard Time. But again, please follow and hit the notification button and recommend my channel to someone else so that they can have their needs met as well. They can get knowledge and community here in this space. I also like to, for Black women who are looking for free resources, community as well. I am a member of Stephanie Perry's Stephanie Perry and Rashida Dow's Exodus Summit, that has been so beneficial to me as a Black woman, especially in terms of getting support that I don't have to pay for. And if that is an issue, like it is for a lot of people, let's not make talking about finances and needs a shame. That is white supremacy. That is a relic of that as well, because we are a communal and community based people. Yes, there are individual needs, but part of those, we are all individuals that recognize that we are part of a collective, and connectivity brings healing, it brings connection, it brings knowledge. That is who we are as a people, and it's time for us to reclaim that. And so I have no problem with promoting that particular group. I, got connected to that group just from social media and talking to other Black women who wanted to be in a place that was safe for us. And it was just for us because, there are a lot of external agents out there who constantly, we see it in social media, we see it everywhere. If it's not self-care culture vulturing, it is some other form of vulturing. And it's exhausting and it wears and tears on us as a people. And so it's important for us to have those resources and places to be that are just built for us, where we can be our whole selves and we can unmask. Also, therapy for Black girls. If you need to access therapy services or you need a listing of um, providers, clinical providers in the mental health space for Black women, that is a great resource. They're also on Instagram as well. If you read or go to my blog, freedomatthecrossroads.com, I do have a resource page as well as in the description for this video. I should also have some free resources listed there as well. In my previous live, I talked about utilizing your work-based resources as well to get you the self-care you need without paying for it. Keyword: free, 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 free. I spoke on that in detail in that live video. It should have been the one before, one or two videos, live streams or videos prior to this one, where I speak on that. So if self-care, if you're a Black woman and you need mental health services that are free, you can go to Therapy for Black Girls. Do your research with your employer-based benefits. Go to your resource page, look for your employee assistance program or some other terminology around that. If you don't know where to find that, speak to your benefits um, representative in your place of work. That's assuming you have, like mostly here in the US, your benefits, your health care is tied to your employer. So there are free resources associated with that, but I'm going to be honest with you, they don't make it easy or clear cut for you to understand what that's about and what your entitlements are under that, because again, it's free, right? And so I spoke on that in my previous video, where live stream video, where I said, get your employer to pay for your self-care. It's something along that title. Okay, now back to Decolonized Self-Care, Self-Care Culture Vultures, and Stolen Rituals, and Silent Theft, which is what we're talking about today. And, I'm just going to move on to, my last point, which is, how to root your healing in liberation. Because as much as we all want to feel great, we want to feel healthy, we want to feel renewed, we want to feel strong. Well, let me remove strong because that's in another video. We don't want to be the strong Black woman. Let's remove that terminology from our vocabulary for reasons I spoke to previously. You want to feel healthy. You want to be whole, in alignment, not in survival mode, no longer burnt out from dealing with microaggressions and other discriminatory practices in this environment that we live in. Decolonized, by and large, and this is basically how I'm going to end today's session, is decolonized self-care means unlearning whitewashed wellness, resisting hyper-individualism. That whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. That is white supremacy. I'm going to leave that there. But moving on. Decolonized self-care means unlearning whitewashed wellness, resisting hyper-individualism, and grounding your healing in community, cultural memory, and liberation. I need us to tie in or hone in on the fact that this care is political, collective, ancestral. And when you are stripped of all of that, you're just flying blind into oblivion. You truly are. You're just not even keeping your head above water. because you're trying to get into something, come into a space that is not built for you. A lot of things in the society, in this culture, in this environment that we live in here was not built for Black people. From the way the roadways are structured, the way the neighborhoods are structured. You wonder why we don't have high speed rail on the level of China and Japan? It's racism, baby. It's making things inaccessible. A lot of the neighborhoods, the way a lot of these things were planned and structured, urban planning and all of that, was to keep our people out. You wonder why you don't have all, like a number of places, like when you go to, yes, Mexico of all places, playgrounds out to wazoo, um, swimming, community swimming pools and all of that. Racism. If you've done the work and done the reading during the civil rights movement and before, when that was moving forward, some people, a lot of them, by the way, who so hated Black people and the idea of Black people accessing something that they were accessing, they chose to fill up the community swimming pools with concrete rather than have our people swim in those pools. Okay? We had neighborhoods trashed, dismantled so that major roadways could destabilize our communities economically and so forth, all in the name of industrialization, urban planning, or building those roads. Look at the history of some of those roads, because a lot of the roads and highways in this country don't make sense, and they don't make sense for a reason. You wonder why public transportation is getting more expensive and is expensive. It wasn't built for us. It was not built for us. You wonder why your health care is tied to your employer. Mm, racism, making things inaccessible to a certain group of people. So I need us to start tying these things in, especially when it comes to self care and your personal health and well being as a Black woman. The more you know, the more you make connection, the more you reclaim, the more work you do internally, the better you feel, the healthier you are. Once you start decentering whiteness, white supremacy, patriarchy, misogyny, because you're going to go through that whole gamut. You're going to go through all of that. Your real self-care begins. And you can't, and you get to a point that you can't unsee any of this stuff. And that's why, again, I also talk on this channel too about moving abroad. I'm starting to talk more about that, moving abroad in the context of your healing process. Because more and more Black women who are able are finding ways to leave this environment because they recognize for their own personal healing and thriving to happen in order for them to move to the next level and next evolution of themselves, their healing journey, and so on and so forth, they have made the choice in their best interest to exit the United States, to move abroad. A number of them have moved to Mexico. I've met with some of them on some of my own trips. Some have moved to Southeast Asia. You see this all over social media. Some are very, Gen Z and very, what do you want to call it? Not realistic in terms of what they show you. Some are very, transparent about life, abroad, living abroad. And I'm going to start talking about more about that too, because part of your self care is recognizing and taking and asking and taking what you need to heal, what you need to thrive. It's time for us to take what we need unapologetically, without shame, and without laying on the altar of other people's expectations, without setting yourself on fire in order to keep other people warm. And so I will be talking more about that because that is something, on to be honest, that I'm also considering as well as a women's self-care and health coach for Black women. I'm thinking about that as well, actively investigating and researching if, you know, what I need to do that. And I've spoken to Black women who also live in Africa who've made the choice to go back to Africa. No, it's not perfect. No, it's never going to be in a utopia. But most, if not all of them, have one common thread. The level and intensity of discriminatory, institutionalized racism and anti-Blackness that we deal with and have historically dealt with here in these United States is nothing near the level of what they're doing. And they said they're thriving. And that is what the ultimate goal here is to thrive. Thank you. Hi, James. Thanks for tuning in. But this is an important topic I will be speaking more on over the weekend. I will also be revisiting some other aspects of this. But again, this is self care for Black women, and this is Self Care Talks, always here. And yes, I will always talk about empowering Black women because self care is foundational to all of that. If you're not healthy, mind, body, and spirit, if you're not self aware, if you are not secure, nothing you want to achieve will be possible. If you want to get out of burnout, if you want to get out of survival mode, decolonize self care, in my estimation, is the primary path to doing that and achieving that. And so that's why I talk about decolonize self care because the truth of the matter is um, it's huge, it's central. And if you don't do the work associated with decolonized self care, you're going to stay stuck where you are. And that's both figuratively and in this real physical world that we exist right now. So, again, I want to thank you for tuning in to listen to me talk about self-care culture vultures and stolen art, stolen rituals, and silent theft, and what that typically looks like. And I did that by giving examples of things like yoga, of sound, healing baths, sound baths, things of that nature. I've experienced them in their indigenous places where they actually originated, for the most part. I've yet to head to link up with some friends in India to explore that. But this is kind of not the time, given the conflict that's going on in northern India with Pakistan, I believe. So yeah, but this is where the rubber meets the road, and I need us to start doing the work so that we can heal, thrive, evolve, and center ourselves and reclaim ourselves, our ways of doing and believing and healing, as well as our labor and our energy and our knowledge base. It's time to do that. It's time to start protecting, gatekeeping all of that because we will always have That's human nature. There will always be bad behavior from certain people, both within our communities and outside of our communities. And I need us to start protecting that and reclaiming that as Black women. So, again, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to log off and wish you a very, very awesome self care weekend because today is Friday. I keep forgetting care weekend. And yeah, I just want you to enjoy that. Again, I have resources in the descriptions for this live video, but I also encourage you to share this channel and this video with someone who will benefit from it. And if particularly if you're a Black woman, and stay tuned for more from me here at this channel. And I encourage you to also check the playlist as well. I do have a number of other topics I talk about. I do talk about, and some of them I have talked about skincare because skincare is an issue for me. I have very sensitive skin. So sometimes, a lot of times, I use certain brands, but I also DIY some things as well. And that's both for my skin and hair because believe in giving myself what I need unapologetically. And I believe in sticking to decolonized roots. And so there are some practices that, again, that were self care, but skincare as well. And no, I will not be sharing that live on this platform, only in protected communities, because guess what? I believe in sticking to what's culturally relevant, what's for us, but also protecting that with boundaries, also known as gatekeeping. Till next time, thank you for joining me here, and I appreciate you. Be well.